2 Apache brides were hanged for being infertile, but a lone rancher saved them. The late afternoon sun hung low over the rugged hills of New Mexico, casting long shadows across the dry earth. The wind moved slowly, carrying the scent of dust, sage, and the faint tang of smoke from distant campfires. In this remote stretch of land, far from the nearest town, life was harsh, and survival was a daily struggle. It was here that 2 young Apache women, Alani and Nayeli, had arrived just a week earlier, bound by marriage to a family that had lived on the land for generations. They had come willingly, hoping for safety and a new life, but the reality they faced was more difficult than they could have imagined. Alani, the elder of the 2, had soft brown eyes that always seemed to be searching, always curious and cautious at the same time. Nayeli, younger and more spirited, carried herself with a quiet defiance, a strength that sometimes masked the fear she felt deep inside. Both women had left their small village in the mountains, leaving behind their families, friends, and the only home they had ever known. The journey had been long, filled with dusty trails, rocky paths, and nights spent under the stars. They had relied on each other's company to keep their spirits alive, speaking in whispers about their hopes and fears. But now, as they stood in the shadow of their new home, a large, weathered wooden ranch house, they felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on them. The house itself seemed imposing. Its walls were sun-bleached, and the wooden planks creaked with every gust of wind. A small barn stood to the side, and beyond it fields of dry grass stretched toward the horizon. The land was beautiful in its way, wide and open, but it was also unforgiving. Water was scarce, the soil hard, and the animals that roamed freely, cows, horses, and the occasional coyote, reminded the newcomers that life here required constant effort and vigilance. The women could feel the tension in the air even before they stepped inside. Inside, the family that awaited them was a mixture of stern faces and quiet curiosity. The patriarch, a man named Silas, was tall and rigid, with deep lines etched across his sun-darkened face. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, seemed to measure every movement, every expression. He spoke little, letting the weight of his presence communicate more than words could. Around him, his relatives moved with practiced caution, glancing at the newcomers with a mixture of suspicion and interest. Alani and Nayeli were quickly aware that in this household, every action was noticed, every word remembered. Mistakes were not easily forgiven. The first days were filled with instruction and observation. The women were taught where to draw water, how to tend the small garden patches, and how to care for the animals. They learned which herbs could be used for cooking, which roots could be eaten raw, and which plants were dangerous to touch. Every day was physically exhausting, every task demanding attention and precision, but the emotional toll was heavier. The women were constantly reminded of their place in the household, silent, obedient, and useful. Any hesitation, any sign of weakness, was met with sharp looks or curt remarks. Alani noticed immediately how the family watched her and Nayeli. It was not the gentle scrutiny of curiosity, but something colder, something that seemed to judge the women not for who they were, but for what they could produce. It was made clear, in subtle words and lingering glances, that the ability to bear children was not just desired but expected. Fertility was a sign of worth, a measure of success in this world, and any woman who could not fulfill that expectation was viewed with suspicion, sometimes even contempt. The idea of being judged this way was foreign to the women. In their village, women were valued for their strength, their skill, and their wisdom. But here, the measure of a woman's worth seemed reduced to a single possibility, the hope that she could give birth. Nayeli, for all her quiet courage, found herself shrinking under the weight of these unspoken demands. She had never imagined that her body would be so closely scrutinized, that her value would hinge on something beyond her control. Alani, sensing her sister's anxiety, tried to offer comfort, speaking softly at night when the house was silent. "We will find our place," she whispered. "We must be patient and we must be careful. We can survive this, Naeli." But even Alani felt the chill of fear, the nagging worry that their presence in the household might become a source of conflict or worse. The first week passed slowly, each day a test of endurance. The women rose before dawn to help with the animals, feeding the horses and milking the cows. They worked in the garden under the relentless sun, weeding, planting, and learning the rhythms of the land. Each evening they returned to the house exhausted, their bodies aching, their minds heavy with the weight of observation and silent judgment. Conversations were few and cautious, as they quickly learned that any misstep could provoke anger or disdain. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Alani and Naeli sat quietly outside the house, washing their few belongings in a small tin basin. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of wild sage and dry earth. The women spoke in low tones, sharing memories of home, of their families, and of the mountains they had left behind. The air between them was thick with longing and unspoken fears. "Do you think we will ever be accepted here?" Naeli asked, her voice trembling. Alani paused, feeling the weight of her sister's words. She wanted to reassure her, to promise safety that she could not guarantee. "We have to be careful," she said finally. "We must show them we are useful, that we can work. Perhaps then they will accept us." But acceptance seemed distant. Rumors began to circulate in the nearby settlement about the new brides. Whispers reached the women's ears, quiet, almost unnoticed comments about their youth, their silence, and most painfully, their ability to bear children. Alani noticed the subtle shifts in the family's behavior, a cold glance here, a whispered conversation there. Even small mistakes, like spilling water or misplacing a tool, were met with sharp reprimands. The women felt the weight of scrutiny pressing closer every day. It was during this first week that the women encountered Samuel, a lone rancher who lived several miles away on his own land. Samuel was known in the area for his quiet demeanor, his skill with horses and cattle, and his unwavering sense of right and wrong. He often traveled between settlements, checking on his herd and tending to his property. On one particularly hot afternoon, as Alani and Naeli carried water from a distant well, they noticed a man observing them from the edge of the field. He was tall, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his eyes, his posture relaxed yet alert. Samuel did not approach immediately. Instead, he watched quietly, assessing the situation with careful eyes. The women, unaware of his presence at first, felt a fleeting sense of relief when they realized someone was near, not a threat, but a potential witness to their isolation. The first meeting was brief. Samuel offered a simple greeting, and the women, startled, replied cautiously. He asked questions about their well-being, about their journey, and about the land they now called home. His voice was calm, steady, and there was an ease in his manner that was unfamiliar to them in the tense household they had entered. For a moment, Alani and Naeli felt a spark of hope, a reminder that not everyone in this harsh land wished them harm. Samuel's presence was a quiet comfort, a reminder that there was kindness and protection beyond the walls of their new home. That night, as the women lay on the hard wooden floor of their small room, the memory of Samuel lingered. They whispered to each other, wondering if he could be trusted, if he might ever intervene if danger came. The fear of what the family expected of them, the expectation of fertility, the threat of scorn or worse, pressed heavily on their hearts. Yet in the quiet, there was also a glimmer of possibility. Perhaps, in this vast and lonely landscape, help could come from the most unexpected places. Perhaps, they thought, survival was not only about endurance but also about the courage to trust, even when the world seemed cold and unforgiving. As the days turned into weeks, Alani and Naeli began to understand the rhythm of their new life. They rose with the sun, labored through the heat, and returned each evening to the same silence and scrutiny. Yet beneath the surface, a subtle tension grew, a mixture of fear and hope. They learned to navigate the complex expectations of their household, to speak softly, move carefully, and observe without drawing attention. And always, in the back of their minds, was the memory of the quiet rancher who had offered a word of kindness, a hint that not all in this world was harsh and unforgiving. It was a small thread of light in an otherwise shadowed existence, but it was enough to sustain them, to remind them that survival and perhaps safety was possible, even in the most unlikely of places. The days after the women's arrival passed quietly, but beneath the surface, the tension in the household was growing. Silas, the patriarch, had started to notice that Alani and Naeli had not yet shown any signs of fertility. In his eyes, this was not just a personal disappointment. It was a threat to the future of his family line. He watched them carefully, sometimes lingering at the doorway when they carried water or worked in the garden, his eyes sharp and unyielding. Every action, every misstep, seemed amplified under his scrutiny. Alani and Naeli could feel the weight of his gaze, though he never spoke openly about the subject. The message was clear. They were being judged, and failure was not an option. Inside the house, the atmosphere became colder. The women learned to move with caution, speaking only when necessary, their laughter disappearing like a distant memory. Naeli's youthful spirit began to dim as fear settled in her chest. She would glance at Alani in the evenings, seeking comfort, but even Alani struggled to remain calm. Each day brought new reminders of their fragile position. A misplaced tool, a burnt meal, or even a quiet sigh could draw a disapproving look from Silas or a sharp whisper from one of the other family members. It was as if the walls themselves carried judgment. The women soon learned that gossip traveled quickly in the small settlement nearby. One afternoon, while gathering firewood along the edge of the property, Alani overheard a conversation between two women from a neighboring homestead. Their voices were hushed but clear. "Have you seen the new brides?" one whispered. "They are so quiet, but they are no good. I hear they cannot bear children. Such shame for a family." The words struck Alani like a cold wind. She had expected challenges in adapting to a new life, but she had not imagined that whispers and rumors could cut as sharply as any spoken anger. Naeli's hand tightened around a piece of wood she carried, her knuckles white. The thought of being labeled worthless because of something beyond their control was unbearable. By the end of the week, the tension reached a breaking point. One evening, Silas called the women into the main room, his voice low but commanding. "I want to speak to you about your duties," he said. Alani and Naeli exchanged a nervous glance before stepping forward. Silas did not smile. There was no warmth in his words. "I expect this household to thrive," he continued, "and that includes continuing our line. You understand what I mean." His eyes lingered on them, and Alani felt a chill run down her spine. The message was unmistakable. The threat of punishment was real, even if unspoken. The women left the room shaken. They spoke little that night, lying on their thin mats, staring at the ceiling as the wind rattled the window frames. Naeli whispered, her voice trembling, "Alani, what if he does something? What if they hurt us?" Alani squeezed her sister's hand, trying to reassure her even as her own fear grew. "We have to be careful," she said softly. "We cannot give them a reason. We must stay strong and keep moving forward." There is still hope, but hope felt fragile in the dim light, like a candle fighting against the wind. Outside the ranch house, Samuel continued to observe from a distance. He noticed the careful, almost fearful way the women moved, the tension in their posture, and the quick glances they exchanged. He could sense that danger was growing, though he did not yet know the full extent of it. Samuel had lived in this land for years, and he had seen the harshness of human nature in many forms. But something about this situation stirred a protective instinct within him. He decided to keep a careful watch, moving quietly along the edges of the property, noting the routines of the family and the vulnerabilities of the women. As days turned into weeks, Silas's behavior became more unpredictable. He began testing the women with small challenges, seemingly innocent tasks that carried hidden expectations. He would ask them to prepare meals at short notice, fetch water during the hottest part of the day, or tend the animals in the fields while he watched. If they faltered in any way, his disapproval was immediate and sharp. The women learned quickly to anticipate his moods, to plan their movements with precision, and to mask any signs of fatigue or frustration. The fear of failure became a constant companion. One afternoon, Alani and Naeli were working in the garden when Silas approached, his steps slow but deliberate. He watched them carefully as they bent over the soil, planting seeds for the upcoming season. "You are slow," he said abruptly, his voice low and menacing. "If you cannot keep up with this work, how can I trust you with anything more important?" The women froze, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on them. They exchanged a quick glance, understanding without speaking that any response had to be measured. Alani straightened slowly, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "We will do better," she said softly. Naeli nodded, swallowing hard, her hands still gripping the small tools she carried. The tension in the household was mirrored by the growing whispers in the nearby settlement. Word spread that the new brides were failing in their expected duties, though no one knew the details. Alani and Naeli could feel the eyes of strangers on them when they ventured into town for supplies. Some looked with curiosity, others with thinly veiled judgment. It was as if the weight of expectation followed them everywhere, an invisible burden that grew heavier with each passing day. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Alani and Naeli sat quietly outside, gathering themselves after a long day. Naeli's voice was barely audible. "Alani, I cannot bear this. I feel like they are waiting for us to fail, and if we do, I don't know what will happen." Alani held her sister close, feeling the tremor in her body. "I know," she whispered, "but we have to survive. We cannot let them break us. We must be smart. We must be careful." The sisters remained in silence, listening to the wind through the dry grass, each sound a reminder of the world beyond the ranch walls, each shadow a whisper of potential danger. Samuel watched from a distance that night. He had observed the women carefully, noting the subtle signs of fear and the harsh control of Silas. He knew that if the situation continued unchecked, it could lead to disaster. Samuel's mind began to formulate a plan, though he was careful not to act too soon. He knew that any confrontation had to be calculated, subtle, and precise. The women needed protection, but rash action could make their situation worse. His quiet presence became a steady, if unseen, source of hope, a potential lifeline in a world that seemed determined to strip it away. The next morning brought new challenges. Silas assigned the women to tasks that were more difficult than before, testing their endurance and resilience. Alani and Naeli moved quickly and efficiently, aware that any delay or mistake could invite scrutiny. The work was exhausting, but they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that survival required both strength and caution. Even as their bodies ached and their spirits wavered, they found small moments of connection, supporting each other in silence, sharing brief smiles, and offering quiet encouragement. These moments became their refuge, a fragile shield against the harsh reality of their environment. Despite the fear and tension, the women began to notice small acts of kindness from unexpected places. The youngest daughter of the family, a quiet girl who often watched from the corners of the house, occasionally left water or food for Alani and Naeli without speaking. Even these small gestures felt like sunlight breaking through a cloudy sky, reminders that compassion could exist even in the hardest of circumstances. Each act of kindness, however subtle, gave the women a sliver of hope and a reason to keep moving forward. As the days passed, Alani and Naeli understood that the threat of Silas's anger was more than just words. The environment they lived in was unforgiving, and failure could have serious consequences. The women became adept at anticipating challenges, observing the family's moods, and adapting quickly to the demands of their daily life. Yet, amidst the fear, they found strength in each other and in the quiet presence of Samuel, who continued to watch from a distance, waiting for the right moment to intervene. In the evenings, when the chores were done and the sky turned deep blue, the sisters would sit together in the quiet, talking softly about dreams and memories of home. They spoke of mountains, rivers, and forests they had left behind, of families and friends who were now distant but never forgotten. These conversations became a lifeline, a reminder that the world beyond the ranch walls still existed, and that hope, no matter how small, could survive even in the harshest conditions. The tension in the household continued to build, the threat of Silas's disapproval ever present. Yet, through careful observation, quiet endurance, and the unspoken support of one another, Alani and Naeli began to navigate their new life with resilience. They understood that survival required both caution and courage, that every movement, every word carried weight. And in the shadows, Samuel remained vigilant, a quiet guardian ready to act if the danger grew too great. The days were long, the work demanding, and the fear constant. Yet in these trials, the women discovered the strength of their bond, the power of hope, and the quiet determination that would carry them forward. Though the future remained uncertain, they learned that even in the darkest of circumstances, survival was possible, and that courage often began with the simplest acts of endurance and trust. The days grew hotter, and the sun beat relentlessly down on the dry, rugged landscape. Alani and Naeli had learned to wake before dawn, to work tirelessly in the fields, and to carry water from distant wells. Each day was a test of endurance, and each evening brought exhaustion that settled deep in their bones. Yet even as they moved with careful precision, the tension in the house continued to mount. Silas, the patriarch, seemed to grow more restless, more demanding. His eyes, sharp and watchful, missed nothing. Every misstep, no matter how small, was noted and remembered. One morning, Alani noticed a change in Silas's behavior. He walked through the property with a slow, measured pace, pausing at the corners of the house and the edge of the fields. He watched her and Naeli carefully, making silent calculations that the women could not read. Alani felt a knot tighten in her stomach. There was a weight in the air, heavy and suffocating, that told her something significant was about to happen. She exchanged a glance with Naeli, whose eyes were wide with fear. "We must be careful," Alani whispered, more to herself than to her sister. Naeli nodded, gripping her basket tightly, her knuckles white. Later that day, Silas called the women into the main room. The air inside was cooler, but the tension felt heavier than the heat outside. Silas's voice was calm but carried an edge that made Alani and Naeli's hearts pound. "You have been here long enough," he said. "I need answers." His eyes swept over them, lingering in a way that made them shrink under his gaze. The women had learned to keep their heads bowed, to speak softly, and to respond only when spoken to. Yet the gravity of his words pressed upon them. Alani spoke first, her voice steady though quiet. "We are learning, sir." "We are trying our best," Naeli echoed her tone barely audible. "Yes, we are working hard." Silas's lips pressed together, and for a moment the room was filled only with the sound of the wind rattling the window panes. Then with a sudden movement he walked toward them, his steps deliberate and slow. "Your best may not be enough," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "I cannot wait forever. Time is passing. You know what is expected." The words landed like stones in Alani and Naeli's chests. They had anticipated scrutiny, but this was different. This was no longer about learning the work or adapting to the household. It was about a looming, unspoken threat. The women felt their hearts race, their palms growing slick with sweat. They knew, without being told directly, that failure could bring consequences beyond simple reprimands. Fear gnawed at them, sharp and relentless, threatening to paralyze their movements. Over the next few days, Silas's actions became more deliberate. He began assigning tasks that were designed to test not just their skill but their endurance and patience. Alani and Naeli found themselves carrying water in the hottest part of the day, lifting heavy baskets of grain, and tending to the livestock under his watchful eyes. Each task was accompanied by whispered comments and sharp glances, subtle reminders that their position in the household was precarious. The women moved with precision, careful to avoid any mistake that could be interpreted as failure. Even as they worked, the fear in the air was palpable. The other family members, sensing Silas's growing unrest, added to the pressure. Quiet remarks, fleeting glances, and whispered warnings made it clear that the women were being judged constantly. Alani and Naeli felt as if they were walking a tightrope, where one slip could result in disaster. At night, when the house was quiet and the wind stirred the dry grass outside, they would whisper to each other about the looming threat. "We cannot fail," Alani said softly. "We have to find a way to survive." Naeli nodded, though her eyes were filled with worry. "But how?" she asked. "What can we do?" It was during one of these long evenings that Samuel decided he could no longer remain a silent observer. He had been watching from the distance, noting the patterns of the household, the strict routines, and the subtle signs of fear on the women's faces. Samuel had lived in the rugged lands for many years and had seen human cruelty in various forms, but he also believed that courage and action could prevent tragedy. He began to plan carefully, considering how to intervene without provoking further danger. He knew that a direct confrontation with Silas could be risky, but doing nothing was no longer an option. The first opportunity came unexpectedly. One afternoon, as Alani and Naeli were fetching water from the well at the edge of the property, Silas approached with an unusually severe expression. He demanded that they carry a heavy load of supplies across the field, far beyond their usual routine. The women struggled under the weight, their muscles burning, their breath coming in short gasps. Silas walked behind them, observing, his silence more threatening than words. For the first time, Alani and Naeli realized that their survival might depend not just on caution but on external help. From the shadows, Samuel watched carefully. He noted the danger in every step, the strain in the women's movements, and the quiet menace in Silas's presence. His mind raced, calculating the best course of action. He could not intervene directly in public, not yet, but he could position himself as an ally, someone who might provide support when the time came. He moved closer under the cover of trees, keeping himself hidden while observing every detail. That night, Alani and Naeli sat in their small room, exhausted from the day's work. The fear in their hearts was sharper than ever, but there was also a flicker of hope. They had noticed Samuel's presence in the fields, and though they did not fully understand his intentions, his quiet watchfulness felt like a lifeline. "Do you think he can help us?" Naeli asked, her voice trembling. Alani considered the question carefully. "I do not know," she replied. "But perhaps he is someone we can trust. We must be careful, but we cannot ignore any chance for help." Over the following days, Samuel continued to observe, learning the routines of the household and identifying moments when the women were most vulnerable. He noticed how Silas's anger flared unpredictably, how the other family members reinforced his authority, and how small mistakes could lead to severe reprimands. Samuel began to formulate a plan to intervene, knowing that timing and precision would be crucial. His goal was not to confront Silas recklessly, but to create a path for the women to survive. perhaps even escape the looming threat. One afternoon, as Alani and Naeli worked in the garden under the scorching sun, Samuel quietly approached a spot where he could communicate without being seen. He left a small note, folded carefully and hidden in a rock by the edge of the garden. The note read simply, "Do not lose hope. I am watching. Trust me when the time comes." Alani discovered it while tending the plants, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and relief. She showed it to Naeli, whose eyes widened in disbelief. "Do you think he can help us?" Naeli whispered. Alani nodded, a spark of determination lighting her expression. "We must trust him," she said. "We have no other choice." The message from Samuel changed something in the women. Though fear remained, they felt a new sense of possibility. They began to look for small opportunities, moments when they could act carefully to protect themselves or signal Samuel if the danger became immediate. They learned to read the subtle cues in Silas's behavior, to anticipate his anger, and to move with precision to avoid provocation. Each day became a delicate balance of endurance, observation, and quiet strategy. As the tension in the household continued to rise, Silas's demands became harsher. He required the women to complete multiple tasks simultaneously, testing their endurance and patience. Alani and Naeli moved quickly, coordinating their efforts to meet the impossible standards set before them. Each successful completion of a task brought relief, but the fear never fully dissipated. They understood that their survival depended not only on their labor, but on the careful support of Samuel, whose presence remained their only source of hope. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of gold and crimson, Alani and Naeli sat quietly, reflecting on the days that had passed. "We are stronger than we think," Alani whispered. "We have survived every test so far, and with Samuel's help, we may survive what comes next." Naeli nodded, drawing courage from her sister's words. "We must be brave," she said. "We have no choice but to trust in hope." Samuel watched from the edge of the property that night, his heart heavy with concern but steady with determination. He knew that the time for cautious observation was nearing its end. The danger was growing, and soon, decisive action would be required to protect the women. He considered every possible scenario, planning for obstacles, anticipating resistance, and preparing for the moment when intervention would be unavoidable. The turning point was approaching, and Alani and Naeli, guided by their growing courage and Samuel's quiet support, began to prepare themselves. The fear that had weighed so heavily on them became a tool, sharpening their awareness and strengthening their bond. They understood more than ever that survival required careful planning, resilience, and trust in those who could offer protection. And Samuel, watching silently from the shadows, knew that the moment to act would soon arrive, a moment that could change the course of their lives forever. The sun rose slowly over the rugged hills, painting the sky in pale shades of pink and gold. Alani and Naeli had already been awake for hours, their hands blistered from the work in the fields, their bodies weary but alert. Today, the tension in the household was thicker than ever. Silas's gaze lingered longer than usual, sharp and calculating, and the women could sense the brewing storm before it fully arrived. Every movement they made, every word spoken, seemed to be watched and judged. The fear that had shadowed them for weeks now pressed in like a heavy weight, leaving little room for hope. Samuel had been observing from the distance since dawn, crouched in the shadows of the trees along the edge of the property. He had watched the events unfold carefully, noting Silas's patterns, the reactions of the other family members, and the subtle signs that indicated rising anger. Samuel knew that the moment to act was approaching. He had studied the layout of the land, memorized the paths through the trees and hills, and prepared himself for the delicate operation that would be needed to protect the women. Every step had to be precise, every movement cautious. One wrong action could ignite disaster. Inside the house, The atmosphere was oppressive. Silas had begun to demand more from Alani and Naeli, testing their endurance in increasingly difficult ways. He required them to complete multiple tasks simultaneously, often under the blazing sun or while tending to the animals in harsh conditions. His disapproval was sharp, and his anger was now more open, no longer hidden behind veiled remarks. The women felt the walls closing in, the weight of judgment pressing on every step they took. Each day became a battle not just of physical strength, but of willpower, endurance, and careful observation. That afternoon, Samuel noticed a clear opportunity. Silas had left the women alone for a brief period while attending to a dispute with one of the neighboring ranchers. The women were carrying water from the distant well, their baskets heavy, their bodies trembling under the strain. Samuel moved closer, staying hidden, ready to guide them if needed. Alani noticed a figure watching from the edge of the field, partially hidden by the tall grass and shadows. At first her heart skipped a beat, fearing another family member's scrutiny, but then she realized it was Samuel. Relief and hope surged through her chest. She nodded subtly, letting Naeli know that help was near. The women completed their tasks quickly, careful to avoid making any noise or attracting attention. Samuel approached once they were out of sight of the house, his movements quiet and deliberate. "Stay calm," he whispered, his voice steady and reassuring. "I am here. You are safe for now." Alani and Naeli felt a flicker of hope, a fragile but powerful spark that had been missing for so long. They nodded silently, trusting him despite the fear that still lingered in their hearts. Samuel led them through the narrow paths between the hills and trees, using his knowledge of the land to avoid detection. The journey was difficult, the terrain was rough, the ground uneven, and the heat relentless. The women stumbled at times, their legs heavy and aching, but Samuel remained patient, guiding them carefully and offering quiet encouragement. He spoke little, understanding that their safety depended on silence and focus. Alani and Naeli felt a mixture of fear and relief, their hearts racing with both the danger they had left behind and the hope that lay ahead. As they moved further from the ranch, Samuel explained the plan. "There is a safe place where you can rest," he said quietly. "It is far enough from the house and the settlement. No one will find you there. You will be free from harm." The women listened intently, their minds processing the reality of escape. The thought of safety, of finally being free from constant judgment and fear, was almost overwhelming. Naeli's voice trembled as she asked, "But will he come after us?" Samuel shook his head. "Not if we are careful. We will use the land to our advantage." "You must trust me." Alani and Naeli nodded, clinging to the promise of safety. The journey was long and exhausting. They moved quietly through hidden paths, crossing small streams and climbing rocky hills. Samuel remained vigilant, scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. At times, the women's fear returned, a sudden tightening in their chests that made every step feel heavier. But Samuel's calm presence provided reassurance. He reminded them to focus on each step, on the rhythm of their breathing, on the path ahead rather than the shadows behind. Slowly, the fear began to shift, replaced by cautious optimism and determination to survive. Night fell and the landscape transformed under the silver light of the moon. The stars glittered overhead, distant and serene, a stark contrast to the tension and danger they had left behind. Samuel led the women to a hidden clearing where a small cabin stood, simple but sturdy, surrounded by trees and natural barriers. The cabin belonged to Samuel, a place he had prepared for situations exactly like this. It was safe, isolated, and unknown to anyone in the settlement. Alani and Naeli's hearts lifted as they stepped into the clearing, their bodies exhausted but their spirits lighter than they had been in weeks. Inside the cabin, the women rested on simple mats, drinking water and eating the modest provisions Samuel had brought. The warmth and safety of the space was a stark contrast to the harsh environment of the ranch. For the first time in weeks, they felt a sense of relief, a feeling that survival was possible. Samuel watched them carefully, understanding that their journey was far from over, but recognizing that this moment of safety was crucial. Alani and Naeli began to speak softly, sharing memories of home, of their families, and of the mountains they had left behind. Their voices, though quiet, carried a mixture of relief, gratitude, and lingering fear. Samuel spoke gently, offering guidance and reassurance. "You are safe here," he said. "No one will find you. You can rest, recover, and regain your strength. The world outside may be harsh, but here you are free." Alani and Naeli listened, their eyes shining with unshed tears. The weight that had pressed upon them for so long, the fear of punishment, the threat of failure, the constant scrutiny, began to lift, replaced by a cautious sense of hope. In the days that followed, the women adjusted to their new environment. They tended small garden patches, cared for a few animals, and began to rebuild a sense of normalcy. Samuel continued to watch over them, providing guidance and protection while allowing them the space to regain confidence and independence. The bond between them grew stronger, built on trust, gratitude, and shared experience. Alani and Naeli began to speak more freely, laughing quietly at small jokes, sharing stories of their past and planning for the future. Yet even in this moment of relative safety, the memory of Silas and the threat he posed lingered. The women understood that they could not return to the ranch, that danger remained in the settlement, and that their lives had been forever changed. But they also recognized their own strength, the courage to endure, the intelligence to survive, and the trust they had placed in Samuel. These qualities became their shield against fear, a reminder that hope could exist even in the darkest of circumstances. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills and the sky turned shades of gold and purple, Alani and Naeli stood outside the cabin, breathing in the fresh air and watching the stars appear one by one. "We are free," Alani whispered, her voice filled with wonder and relief. Naeli nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "Thanks to him," she said softly. Samuel, standing nearby, gave a small nod, acknowledging their words without drawing attention to himself. He understood that true freedom required more than protection. It required trust, courage, and the strength to face the unknown. As the night deepened, the women felt a sense of peace they had not known in weeks. The fear that had haunted them, the constant threat, the judgment, the isolation, was still present in memory but no longer dominated their every thought. They had survived the immediate danger, escaped the harsh control of Silas, and found a place where they could begin again. Their journey was far from complete, but they had taken the first, crucial steps toward a life of autonomy and dignity. Samuel remained vigilant, aware that the world beyond the cabin was still unpredictable. But for the first time, he allowed himself a quiet sense of satisfaction. The women were safe, and the danger had been averted for now. The bond between them had grown stronger, forged in the crucible of fear and survival, and it would continue to guide them in the days to come. Alani and Naeli began to rebuild their lives slowly, learning to trust their own strength and judgment. They discovered that freedom was more than the absence of immediate danger. It was the ability to make choices, to live with dignity, and to hope for the future. With Samuel's careful guidance, they planted seeds in the garden, cared for the animals, and explored the surrounding hills. Each day brought small victories, moments of joy, and reminders that survival and courage could coexist. The story of their escape, of the fear they endured, and of the protection they received became a quiet testament to the power of trust, compassion, and careful planning. Alani and Naeli knew that the world beyond the hills remained uncertain, but they also understood that they had the strength to face it. They had survived, and in surviving, they had discovered a courage that would carry them forward for the rest of their lives. The days after their escape settled into a quiet rhythm. Alani and Naeli awoke each morning to the soft glow of sunlight spilling into the small cabin. The world outside was vast, wild, and untamed, but here they felt a sense of safety and peace that had been foreign for so long. For weeks, they had lived under the oppressive watch of Silas, where every movement, every word, and every breath had been measured against impossible expectations. Now, in the stillness of the hills, they began to understand the meaning of freedom, not just the absence of danger, but the ability to make choices, to care for themselves, and to begin again. Samuel continued to watch over them, though he allowed them space to grow more independent each day. He showed them how to use the land wisely, where to plant vegetables and herbs, how to find clean water, and how to care for a few goats and chickens that roamed the property. Alani and Naeli worked with a new sense of purpose. Each small task was a step toward self-reliance, each moment a quiet act of reclaiming their lives. Even the simple act of carrying water from the stream or tending to the garden became empowering, a tangible reminder that they were no longer at the mercy of others. The women began to notice subtle changes in themselves. Their posture was no longer bent under the weight of constant judgment. Their eyes held a quiet confidence, and their voices, once hesitant and trembling, now carried clarity and strength. They laughed more freely, shared stories of their village and childhood, and began to dream once again of the future. Each small victory was a triumph, each smile a reclamation of the courage that had been overshadowed by fear. One afternoon, as Alani worked in the garden, she looked up at the hills stretching endlessly in the distance. "Naeli," she said softly, wiping sweat from her brow, "do you ever think about our old village?" Naeli paused, sitting on the edge of the garden path. "All the time," she replied. "I miss it, but I also know we could never return. We belong here now where we are safe." Alani nodded, understanding the truth in her sister's words. They had left behind everything familiar, yet they had gained something far more valuable, the freedom to live their lives on their own terms. Samuel had become more than a protector. He had become a teacher and a guide. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried wisdom born from years of living in the harsh land. "You too have survived what many could not," he told them one evening as they sat outside, watching the sun sink behind the hills. "The world can be cruel, but it can also be beautiful. You have the strength to shape your lives, to make choices, and to find happiness." Alani and Naeli listened quietly, absorbing the weight of his words. For the first time, they felt truly seen, not as burdens or failures, but as individuals capable of resilience and courage. As weeks turned into months, the women's lives began to stabilize. They tended to the small garden, collected eggs from the chickens, and helped Samuel with the livestock. They learned how to read the signs of the weather, how to predict storms, and how to navigate the hills safely. Their skills grew, their confidence strengthened, and their sense of self-worth blossomed. The quiet, disciplined life they led was demanding, yet it was also fulfilling. Each day, they discovered new strengths and learned to appreciate the small joys of survival. The taste of fresh vegetables, the warmth of sunlight, the laughter shared over a simple meal. The bond between the sisters deepened during this time. Alani and Naeli relied on each other not just for comfort, but as partners in navigating a world that had once threatened to overwhelm them. They shared dreams and fears, memories of the past, and hopes for the future. Even in moments of doubt, they reminded each other of their resilience. "We survived together," Alani would say. "We can face anything together." Naeli would nod, her eyes shining with gratitude and love for her sister. Their connection became a source of strength, a quiet, unbreakable foundation that carried them through every challenge. One evening, as the sky turned a deep indigo and stars began to twinkle overhead, Alani and Naeli sat outside the cabin, wrapped in blankets against the cool night air. "Do you think they will ever come after us?" Naeli asked, her voice soft but tinged with worry. Alani shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "We are too far and Samuel knows how to keep us safe. They cannot reach us here." Samuel, standing a few steps away, nodded silently. His presence was reassuring, a reminder that vigilance and careful planning could prevent danger even when the world seemed unpredictable. Life continued in this quiet rhythm. Alani and Naeli began to plan for the long term. They expanded the garden, built small structures for storage, and experimented with ways to make their lives more comfortable and self-sufficient. The small cabin became not just a place of refuge, but a home filled with laughter, learning, and growth. Even the most ordinary tasks, baking bread, collecting water, mending clothes, took on a new meaning. They were no longer chores imposed by fear. They were acts of independence and self-determination. In this newfound freedom, the women also reflected on the lessons of their past. They thought about the fear and oppression they had endured at the ranch, the harsh expectations and unspoken threats, and the moments of helplessness that had once defined their days. But they also remembered the courage they had discovered within themselves, the trust they had placed in Samuel, and the bond that had kept them strong. Each memory was a reminder of how far they had come, how much they had endured, and how capable they were of shaping their own destinies. The community nearby eventually became aware of their survival, though the details remained largely private. Some settlers spoke in whispers of the two young women who had vanished from the ranch, unaware that they had found safety and a new life. Alani and Naeli chose to remain distant from the settlement, understanding that independence required discretion. Yet even in this isolation, they found connection with the land, with each other, and with Samuel, who had become a steadfast presence in their lives. Over time, Alani and Naeli discovered a sense of joy that had seemed impossible in their earlier days. They celebrated small achievements, a harvest from the garden, the birth of a chick, a cool breeze on a sweltering afternoon. They shared stories, sang quietly to themselves, and allowed themselves to dream of a future unbound by fear. Each moment of happiness was a quiet victory, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of hope. One day, as the sun rose behind the hills and bathed the land in golden light, Alani turned to Naeli with a smile. "Do you remember how scared we were when we first arrived at the ranch?" she asked. Naeli nodded, her eyes shining. "I do," she said softly. "But look at us now. We are alive. We are safe. We are free." The words hung in the air, a celebration of their journey and the courage it had demanded. Samuel, observing quietly, allowed himself a small smile, knowing that the women had not only survived, they had truly begun to live. In the years that followed, Alani and Naeli built a life of stability and purpose. They continued to care for the land, expand their home, and deepen their connection with Samuel, who had become both a guardian and a mentor. They never forgot the trials they had endured, but they no longer allowed fear to dominate their lives. Instead, they drew strength from each other, from the lessons they had learned, and from the freedom they had fought so hard to achieve. Their story became one of quiet resilience, a testament to courage, hope, and the power of compassion. Alani and Naeli had faced unimaginable fear, survived impossible challenges, and discovered the strength to reclaim their lives. The land around them, once harsh and unforgiving, became a place of growth, learning, and freedom. They had endured, they had persevered, and they had triumphed, not through violence or force, but through courage, careful planning, and trust in one another. As the sun set on another long day, painting the hills in shades of orange and red, Alani and Naeli sat outside the cabin, holding hands and looking toward the horizon. They had survived the trials of the past and were ready to face the future with hope and determination. Samuel stood a few steps away, his watchful eyes steady and calm, a quiet guardian of the life they had built together. The wind stirred through the trees, carrying the scent of earth and sage, A reminder that the world, though sometimes harsh, could also be beautiful and full of possibility. In the end, Alani and Naeli's journey was one of survival, courage, and discovery. They had faced fear, injustice, and uncertainty, yet they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Their lives, once defined by oppression and danger, were now filled with freedom, safety, and hope. And in the quiet hills of New Mexico, the two sisters, once young brides trapped by fear, had finally found the life they deserved.